Hi, folks. You were Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of how what began as an international brotherhood of workers, which was the original basis for Marxism, and how that morphed into other forms of international oneness, or into, we're all victims together here, which is the current iteration of it. So you may wonder, why is it that the lesbian feminist from the gender studies department of the university is out saying, all third world peasants welcome in the first world country. Now, she may not have any idea of what she's actually doing, but in terms of emotional sentiment, she's been led to believe, the uni student has been led to believe that she, in the rich white West, who's the most privileged generation of women ever in the history of the universe, is actually oppressed. Well, what are these oppressions? Where they come with? The patriarchy, of course. Patriarchy. They're misogyny. They're fascist, Nazis everywhere, under every bed, around every corner, in every closet. And so she's a victim, and the third world peasants are a victim because they're the victims of white colonialism. They're victims of whiteness and white supremacy and so on. So she's a victim caused by the white supremacist patriarchy, misogyny. They're victims also caused by the white supremacist colonial. So they're both victims together. So by supporting them, she's actually supporting not only her own victimhood, but she's leading the fight against the patriarchy and the Nazis and the Hitlers and the swastikas and so on and so forth. And she just blindly goes along with that, as of course do many others. So that's her perception. And so the unitedness, the oneness, the support each is supposedly gives to the other is in their victimhood and their opposition to the white supremacy, the Nazis, the colonialists, and so on. Now you can say, well, that's absurd and ridiculous and shallow, and these third world peasants are only that way because of slavery and colonialism. Otherwise, they would be sending rockets to Mars and so. And now again, all absurd, quite ridiculous. Pretty much the entire sub-Saharan African continent was either early or mid-Stone Age in their development, until the 1800s, where they slowly began to sort of reach a point where white men had been 3,000 years plus earlier than that. Nonetheless, this is the propaganda and brainwashing trick that has been perpetrated on the West, particularly the simple-minded. But also to cause division and point out social division, where men and women are, the outcomes between men and women are different, outcomes between gay and lesbian and straight are different, and to point to and create race division, gender division, and so on is the sole. Now they do all this while claiming that everyone else is creating social division. We're only trying to create oneness and equal outcomes. Anything that is against creating equal outcomes is creating social division. But aren't you creating social division by saying all straight white men are Nazis? No, it's not us, it's them, they're the ones. So let's just come back to when Karl Marx originally, I remember Marx was borrowing from some of the earlier philosophers, if you like, in the space, Hegel and so on, and even going back, if you like, to some of the works of Rousseau and so during the French Revolution. But the French Revolution sort of began, if you like, sort of ignited a series of events that put in train a lot of the modern world we see, this supposed equality, fraternity, and all this sort of thing, liberty. And now, whereas there were those who would admit the French Revolution went overboard with the random, arbitrary murdering of people they didn't like, and committees of public safety that could just rando pull someone, hey, we don't like you, dude, to the guillotine for you. So it was hardly a rule of law, due legal process type society. But the idea of Marxism, bear in mind, 1848 was sort of the kick-off point for Karl Marx and his version of it, of social organisation, which came to be, if you like, the blueprint, which we still see today. Now, Marx asserted that the people who owned capital, the factory owners, the property owners, and so on, were oppressing the people that did not own capital, and that their profits, the profits of the factory owning, property owning class, their profits were derived from I guess the financial enslavement really was where he was going with this, but relied on exploiting the workers to make the profit, and that their profits were due to that exploitation. Now, it was a bit of a stretch. Marx did raise some good points, and I think that are still valid for debate today. A lot of people write Marx off as a hysterical lunatic or an idiot. I see that a little bit differently. I see he did add some value, the surplus value concept. Was it completely accurate? Can you apply it to all situations? Can you apply it to situations where there's great technical innovation, where the profits come from the innovation rather than the exploitation? In that area, I believe Marx failed in his analysis, but that it was a if you look at Das Kapital, it's a bit of a tome really, but I think it was a huge step forward in understanding the wider relationship between labour, capital, the general economy, and source of profits and these sort of things. I think it took that debate really a large step forward, and for that he should be immortalised. Was he accurate in all things? Of course not. And his perception of the move, Marx came to analyse at the beginning of Marx. He was beginning to analyse the big shift as the British economy moved from an agricultural economy to an industrial economy, and factories are springing up all over the place. Workers were being displaced from the agricultural industries. They were moving in a very short space of time, moving into towns and cities, into accommodation that was very substandard and thrown together quite quickly. There were issues to do with hygiene, keeping clean water. You got a place that only had 2,000 or 3,000 people in it, and then a few years later it's got 30,000 people, and the government infrastructure and this sort of thing just wasn't adequate. And so clean water and any sort of water, sewage, sanitation generally, food delivery into these areas, that just didn't keep up, and there were a lot of hardships. It was into that environment that Marx came. Now, a lot of the machinery and equipment that was being designed then was new. It was very innovative, whether it's the spinning jenny or anything else, the steam engine and so on. So there were the bankers that backed these new technologies, the people that invented them, and the people that were able to service and maintain them. It was a new technical class and new sort of middle class come technical class. It was into that Marx came, and he saw the huge disparity in the illiterate peasant that had just come from the rural areas coming into the city, and the owner of the factory who'd invented the spinning jenny or some piece of technology that allowed them to realise substantial profits, as indeed did their financial backers of these new technologies. So this created a new class of people, and also caused money to move in different ways. If you look at the landowning class, they were well-to-do because profits were derived from agriculture. But all the peasants on the land, they all had the same sort of house. They all lived pretty uniformly. They had the same income, the same circumstances, give or take. There may be supervisors or overseers or a particularly skilled blacksmith that may sort of buck the trend there, but generally they were pretty much the same. That changed, so that equality of outcome that was artificial in its way was all thrown up in the air, and it changed, and there were people making supernormal profits, and the peasants going from the agricultural place where they had their own house, as in gifted to them by the property owning aristocrat, and then they moved into rental accommodation in the cities and having to work casual jobs, and that created huge disparity in income. This is what Marx saw, and this is the social economic structure he was writing about. It was it was a transitory phase as a more complex economy was being created, and Marx was seeing a snapshot of that, and that I think was the real basis for his misunderstanding of where it was going. But Marx raised the idea, as indeed did the socialist internationals and socialist meetings subsequent to that, going into the Das Kapital, Marx's work there, going into the 1870s and 1880s. The idea was that nations shouldn't and didn't really exist. They were artificial creations. Marx was either arguing, probably more indirectly than anything, but he was saying that the workers of the world have much in common. So it doesn't matter where they are in the world, whether they're a worker in India or a worker in Britain or Germany or Russia or wherever, that the workers of the world should unite and should be as one, and they should see that they're a class of people on their own that transcends national borders and transcends languages and legal jurisdictions, that the workers of the world should unite to throw off the chains of their oppression, being the owners of property, the owners of factories and capital and so on. Now, when even the Boer War, a smaller regional war, the socialists and the Marxists were going out saying, you guys shouldn't be fighting each other, because the soldiers on both sides were typically the working class. So you working class guys shouldn't be getting guns and shooting at each other. You should be uniting against the evil oppressor, being, again, the factory owner and so on. Now, this was even more pronounced, say, in World War I, where there was a large movement, not only in Germany, but in Britain and elsewhere, where socialists were arguing again, hey, workers should be brothers in common. You shouldn't be fighting on behalf of the wealthy classes and dying for them, because in the end, all you're doing is dying for them. You're not really getting anything out of this idea you're defending your country and your border and your people. That's all bullshit. Workers should all stick together. So this was very much a thing, and it kept on going. It didn't stop with the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 and so on. The idea that the socialists in the very elaborate propaganda machine that the Soviet Union Russians quickly developed and pushed onto the West, was this idea that you shouldn't fight your fellow workers. You should instead all unite to create an international communist system where socialism spread all over the world. It was in the Soviet constitution to assist and aid and abet and to spread socialism to all corners of the globe. And they did that through, not necessarily through military action, but an attempt to subvert the Western states through propaganda and cultural subversion and so on, which continued on and really picked up pace in the 1990s, and really moved in the 1990s on, early 1990s onwards. It moved unopposed and unchecked across all Western institutions, which is how we see it today. Now, I've put a link to the song "The Internationale," which actually isn't a bad song, in the Internationale in the description below. So click onto that, and the wording of that will give you a pretty clear idea as to the intent and purpose of the Internationale. It was written originally by a French guy, I think in the 1860s, the words, and then a decade or so later they put music to it. I think somebody from Belgium, maybe, wrote the music, and that was put together into that song and then translated into all sorts of different languages. I put the English version in the description. So this then morphed further. The workers of the world unite became, again, your feminists of the world unite, lesbians of the world unite, and there are a lot of international NGOs, a lot of it financed and orchestrated by the United Nations to bring about a international coordination of these activist groups, all of which are committed to cultural subversion. Now, they do so through imaginary phantoms and ghosts and bogeymen. Nazis are everywhere, under every bed and around every corner. No, they're not. Misogynist, patriarchal, Nazi, fascist oppressors are everywhere, trying to hold down lesbians and all this. No, they're not. But racists are everywhere. Nazi racists are everywhere. No, they're not. So it's all rapists are everywhere, white, and who are all white, by the way. And so it's all these bogeymen that are created, which we have to fight against. The universities are incubators of this hysteria as much as anything in the West today. But again, very much coordinated by a vast NGO network. If you look at the funding that was coming out of US aid, they were funding many of these subversive elements. The American taxpayer was paying for their own subversion, for goodness sakes. So this is how the Marxist concept of oppressor and victim kept on morphing into new iterations of, and the vehicle they used wasn't the overthrow and revolution, and that it wasn't that, which was what Marx was talking about. The workers should unite to overthrow and take over the means of production, which was originally Marxist, but rather it morphed into being equity of outcomes. So as long as all the outcomes are equal, it's tantamount or equivalent to a revolution, given all the resources and spoils are shared. So it effectively is the same as a revolution that comes at the point of a gun. But this was a slow burn, slow bleed cultural revolution and subversion process that's been every bit as effective. I would argue that in history may even judge this cultural subversion of the West as the equivalent of World War III. So instead of running around at the point of a gun and shooting people up, not that can't happen or may never happen again, but the objectives of an armed invasion of the West have pretty much all been achieved, or most of them anyway. And if there's any politician comes along that wants to slow that down or stop it, like Donald Trump, they'll try and put him in prison or even kill him, for goodness sakes. So now the battle isn't over yet, and just as total victory seems around the corner for the globalists and their cultural and economic subversion, just as victory seems just around the next corner, it could be at this point when everything falls apart and they are the ones that end up on the run and being hunted down. And we can only hope for that day. You've been attached to us today to your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.